leather print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Janice Marie Hunt, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, April 12th, 2026 issue of the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A perpetual food craze cycle driven by social media. 2 years ago, when Maria Leyesa opened Foodlogy in Long Beach, California, customers were immediately intrigued by one of her signature bakery items, an UBE brownie. UBE, UBE, UBE was a constant question. Miss Leyesa said nobody knew what it was. The vividly purple yam, pronounced ube, has been a Filipino staple for centuries, but the ingredient is not clearly as widely used in the United States, appearing last year on fewer than 2% of the menus of restaurants tracked by Data Central, a market research firm in Chicago. But in the edges, UBE, pronounced ube, has been creeping into the American diet. Trader Joe's stocked ube ice cream for a few months. Birch Bender sells an ube mocha pancake and waffle mix in stores. And this spring, Starbucks released a limited time iced ube coconut machado. Big food companies, restaurant chains, and even the local coffee shop are battling one another for every dollar. To do that, they need to convince consumers that their sodas, cakes, and entrees are unique or more interesting than their competitors. As a result, a sort of flavor arms race has emerged with teams of consultants and advisors scouring the globe, or more aptly, social media posts, for unusual ingredients or combinations. These new tastes are often sold for only a limited time, a ticking countdown marketing move that resonates particularly well with millennials and Gen Zers who rush to become one of the first to review the summer drink or fall snack and post their thoughts on social media. Whether it's Lay's potato chips or M&Ms or Oreo cookies, manufacturers are constantly coming out with limited time offerings that are teaching an entire group of consumers to always be looking at the next big thing, said Mark Webster, a 40-year-old veteran of the flavor industry who works at T. Hasgua, a customer flavor manufacturer with facilities in California. For restaurants and manufacturers, the risk and rewards for introducing the right flavor at the right time are high. When Dr. Pepper released a strawberries and cream version of its classic soda in 2023, the drink generated nearly $300 million in sales and helped propel the brand past Pepsi the next year. But Coca-Cola Spiced, which was supposed to be a raspberry spice fixture in the company's portfolio, was pulled after only 7 months in 2024. The accent of ube as a hot new flavor has little to do with its subtle blend of mild sweetness, nuttiness, and notes of vanilla or its origins. It's all about the color. One of our criteria for new flavors is that the color has to be social media gorgeous, something that influencers gravitate to, Mr. Webster said. Ubi didn't just suddenly show up on menus. Emily Tang, the chief product officer at Data Central, said Ubi first hit her radar around 2017 when it started popping up in boba tea shops, and on a small number of restaurant menus. The breakout came in the spring of 2022 when Baskin Robbins introduced Ubi coconut swirl ice cream. I thought, hey, now we're off to the races, Miss Tang said. After that, Ubi appeared on more menus in limited time offers. For Halloween in 2024, Dunkin' released Potion Machado featuring a layer of purple marshmallow ubi swirl topped by espresso. Grocers hopped on the ubi train. Trader Joe's rolled out a number of limited time ubi flavored treats, including ice cream, cookies, ubi covered pretzels, and an ubi mocha pancake mix. In 2024, ubi was named Flavor of the Year by T. Hasegawa, and the syrup manufacturer Manin, the spice maker McCormick declared tamarind the flavor of 2024, while a Dutch flavor manufacturer said it was peach. Analysis say a number of flavor megatrends are currently on grocery shelves and restaurant menus. One called the mashup combines opposing unusual and sometimes sort of gross flavors. Think hot honey or maple bacon, or more extreme, Frank's hot sauce goldfish crackers and Oreo Coca Cola soda and cookies. Yuck, that doesn't sound good at all. Americans' interest in Asian food has become more nuanced, with diners looking beyond a handful of well known Chinese, Korean, and Japanese dishes. They are exploring different flavors, ingredients, and more regional dishes as well as foods from Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines. Asian foods and Asian culture have really grown massively here in the U.S., and Ubi is part of that, Ms. Tang said. She pointed to the rising popularity of matcha kimchi, black sesame, yuzu, and other ingredients from China, Japan, and South Korea. Obtaining ubi isn't easy. It is mostly grown in the Philippines on small farms, processed in factories there, and then shipped to the West Coast, says PJ Quesada, a co-owner of Rama Foods, who began importing Filipino food products in the 1970s. Mr. Quesada added that the more mainstream popularity of ubi could spur interest in other products he brings in from the Philippines, including the calamasi, a sort of small, sour lime, and the pilay nut, a soft, high-fat nut. But much of the ubi flavor in foods and beverages doesn't come from the yam itself. In T. Hasgawa's building in an industrial district about 10 miles northwest of Anaheim, California, teams of food chemists spend their days trying to create concentrates of flavors, some that exist in nature and others that don't, like unicorn or glazed donut for food and beverage companies. First, the chemists analyzed the composition of real food. On a day in March, it was pomegranate juice to identify the molecules responsible for aroma and taste. Then natural extracts, oils, and aroma compounds are combined to create concentrated versions of the flavor. A few drops of cherry or lime concentrate can flavor dozens or hundreds of cans of soda, Mr. Webster explained. You can't just put blood orange juice into an energy drink, he said. It would require so much juice that there wouldn't be enough room for other ingredients. Compared with Dubai chocolate, which exploded in popularity a few years ago, thanks to TikTok, and its photogenic bright green filling, ubi has been more of a slow burn flavor, Mr. Webster said. It had been on our radar for 3 years before we named it the flavor of the year, he added. And as it has with other flavors, the lab has produced multiple versions of ubi. Flavors can change or lose their potency, depending on whether they are going into ice cream or baked into a cookie. These days, Mr. Webster is thinking about the next big flavor. Dark sweet cherry, he said, noting that it is T. Hasagawa's current flavor of the year. They're beautiful and Instagram friendly. Plus, they taste terrific. You will see a lot of cherry things come out in the coming months. Few companies are as adept at and as reliant on making a food or drink a viral hit as Starbucks. Each quarter, teams consider as many as 125 flavors, said Dana Pelicano, who leads product development at Starbucks. And even with all of those resources at its fingertips, there are always surprises. Pumpkin spice, for instance, wasn't the leading flavor option in its first season on the menu, Ms. Pelicano noted. Bright green matcha lattes and frappuccinos have been big hits for Starbucks in recent years. In the first quarter of 2025, after it introduced unsweetened matcha based beverage sales rose 40% from a year earlier. Ubi first appeared at the company's Pike Place Market Coffee House in Seattle in the summer of 2024 in the Halo Halo Frappuccino, named for a popular Filipino dessert. But behind the scenes, Starbucks was still tinkering with the right combination. One version included an ubi coconut based top with banana cold foam and coconut pieces. Whether ubi becomes a permanent part of the menu depends on customer demand. When a third year outperforms the first or second, that's a strong signal, Ms. Pelicano said. Ubi has really been a rocket ship this spring. Miss Lassa, the bakery owner, has mixed feelings about the purple yams going mainstream. Born in the Philippines, she moved to the United States with her family when she was young. On one hand, she said she hopes the proliferation of the ubi brings a greater awareness to Filipino cuisine. But I also fear that a lot of people don't know it's from the Philippines. Ms. Liesa said, if ubi takes off on social media because it photographs great and it is very social media friendly, but people don't know it comes from the Philippines, that kind of defeats the purpose. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Annoyance economy. Everyone knows the feeling of being stuck on hold or spending time clicking through an endless series of pages to cancel a subscription or screening spam calls or trying to change a flight. These inconveniences make life less pleasant, but they are easy enough to write off as small concerns as the mere stuff of living a contemporary existence. It turns out that such time sucking, tedious tasks have a meaningful economic impact. The accumulated cost of what some refer to as the annoyance economy adds up to $165 billion a year in lost time and wasted money for American families, according to a new report from Neil Mahoney, a Stanford economics, and Chad Mazo, a policy fellow at Groundwork Collaborative, a progressive research organization. The annoyance economy includes the everyday interactions that should be simple, but often turn into fraught of ordeals, Mr. Mahoney said in an interview, including dealing with hidden fees, spam, insurance claims, or Byzantine cancellation processes. The co authors worked together in the Biden administration, including on offers to crack down on junk fees. Once they left government services, Mr. Mahoney said they started thinking about how to tackle what they saw as a broader set of annoyances and tricks and traps and frustrations that turn simple things into things which are costly and complex. At first, the authors did not know what to call this group of consumer problems, but as they kept working on the project, they landed on the term annoyance economy. Once they did, Mr. Mahoney said it became obvious that it connected these different interactions people have. The term had appeared elsewhere, including in a 2023 Atlantic article about consumer frustrations. Some of the inconveniences plaguing American consumers are a result of clunky processes and outdated regulation. But some, Mr. Mahoney said, are intentionally designed to take advantage of people. And the rise of artificial intelligence chatbots that pose as real people is advancing the capacity for companies to mislead and target consumers. Scammers will be more adept at using AI to scam us than we will be at using it to detect scams, he predicted. Intentional or not, trapping consumers can pay off for corporations. Mr. Mahoney and his colleagues have found that companies that make it harder to cancel subscriptions see revenues tick up 14 to 200%. The annoyance economy is almost universally disliked. People, it turns out, hate being ripped off and resent having their time wasted. In 2024, YouGov poll 87% of respondents strongly or somewhat supported restrictions on telemarketers' use of robocalling. In 2025, poll time, groundwork, and data for progress, two-thirds of likely viewers said they wanted Congress to make addressing such issues a priority. Public distaste could help spur lawmakers to mandate more consumer friendly policies and companies to dial back fees and the like. This will take some work, he suggested, but it is possible. We put people on the moon 50 years ago, he said. We should be able to figure out spam texts and phone calls. The $2 billion. The additional amount Delta Airline expects to spend on fuel through June. The war in Iran has driven up the cost of fuel for airlines, and Delta Airlines expects to spend an additional $2 billion on fuel in the 3 months ending in June. But despite the higher cost, the airline said it was still projecting healthy profits of $1 billion in the quarter. Delta said that it was still seeing strong demand from travelers and that it planned to cut about 3.5% of its flights. Niraj Chokshi of the New York Times reported, already airlines have started passing along their increased costs to consumers. Ed Bastian, the chief executive of Delta, said on a call with reporters that the industry had raised fares twice since the start of the war. On March 30th, the fare on an average domestic U.S. trip was $350, compared with $336 on February 23rd, according to the travel search engine Kayak. And airlines are raising prices on more than just tickets. Last week, Delta and Southwest Airlines announced that they would be charging an additional $10 to check a bag on domestic flights, which followed similar announcements from JetBlue and United Airlines a week earlier. When fuel prices rise, airlines don't just absorb the hit, they pass it along, often in ways that are less obvious than a higher ticket price. Sarah Rathner, a travel and credit card expert at the personal finance website NerdWallet, told Christine Chung of the New York Times. Even if fuel costs go down, airlines may be loath to cut the fees. Such charges can be sticky ones, added Robert Mann, an aviation industry consultant and a former airline executive, told Ms. Chung. Once airline managers see that travelers will tolerate higher fees and fares, why reduce them? The markets have the markets have done awful well in a year of chaos. The markets have been rocky, but the remarkable thing is how good returns for most investors have been over the past 12 months, even including the downturn that started when the United States and Israel attacked Iran on February 28th. They showed that for the average domestic stock mutual fund or exchange traded fund, the losses have been relatively small. A decline for the first quarter of the year of 1.2%. That's according to final investor returns that have arrived from Morningstar, the financial services company. The actual up to the last minute returns for many investors improved on Wednesday when the stock market surged and oil prices dropped with the start of a fragile ceasefire in the Iran war. The S&P 500 has now moved virtually to its starting point for the calendar year. The Morningstar data shows that even with the setback of the war, the average domestic U.S. stock fund gained 16.8% over the 12 months through March. And over 5 years, a stretch that includes the dismal runaway inflation of 2022, the average domestic stock fund returned 8% annualized. This record of resilience adds weight to a compelling but far from foolproof argument that investors are best off sticking with the stock market even when they are troubled by the state of the nation and the world. The narrative goes like this. Since World War II, the U.S. stock market has bounced back regularly from seemingly irretrievable destructive developments like wars, pandemics, domestic unrest, recession, inflation, and flawed economic policies. Corporate earnings have provided the glue holding investor returns together, and most forecasts for corporate earnings remain strong, as they have been for the last few years. But beware, there's no guarantee that the relative equanimity in the markets will persist. If the fighting resumes and if oil prices remain constrained, most corporate earning forecasts have not changed since the start of the war. Yet global economic conditions are shifting rapidly, adding costs and increasing the risk that profits won't grow as rapidly and may even fall. Furthermore, the historical record shows that recessions or runaway inflation can shatter positive investors' returns with little warning. Even when economic conditions seem solid, the markets can plummet at a moment's notice. Trampled norms. I'd add that whatever you may think of President Trump's policies, his behavior is shattering basic human norms. On Tuesday morning, he threatened Iran with total destruction. A whole civilization would die tonight, never to be brought back again. Mm. The president wrote on his social media platform, Truth Social, I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. In a weary response on LinkedIn, Ian Bremmer, the president of EURASIA Group, an independent geopolitical risk consulting firm, said it looks bad for the U.S. president to threaten genocide. Indeed, it does. Wow. The United States and its ally Israel did not destroy all of Iranian civilization on Tuesday night, but the signature remains ooh, tenuous despite the ceasefire, with Iran retaining the ability to throttle the critical strength of Hormuz and send out missile strikes of its own, and Israel continuing to attack southern Lebanon. Even if the Iran war ends soon, the U.S. threats and the Iranian positive response have already changed the world in my estimation. The risk of instability has risen substantially. Investing under these circumstances is hazardous for those who may need to use their money soon, by which I include any period of less than 5 years. The stock market would swing, may be too much to endure. Bonds are particularly safe. They can lose money if lose money too, if sold during periods of rising interest rates. Safe interest bearing accounts and treasury bills are the best bets for those who want to get their hands on their cash quickly and really can't afford to lose any of it. Consider two of the biggest obstacles that investors have faced. In April 2025, Mr. Trump imposed the steepest tariffs since the 1930s, and the markets shuddered when he adjusted many of them after the Supreme Court ruled that he had exceeded his authority in unilaterally imposing tariffs. His administration, that's a lot. Then last month, the war with Iran resulted in the worst interruption in global oil supplies in decades, setting off steep price increases in oil and gasoline and the resumption of a disconcertingly high rate of inflation. The combination of the tariffs and the oil shock might have been enough to derail the economy and the markets. But what's astonishing in retrospect is how well investor returns held up. Morningstar has been providing quarterly mutual fund and exchange traded fund returns to the New York Times for decades. The funds, as well as the workplace-based retirement plan trusts based on them, are now most people in the United States invest. They provide a window on how the stock and bond markets have affected real people, and they suggest that despite all the headlines, most investors have been insulated financially so far. The fund returns for the entire month, 1 year, and 5 years through March 30th included these highlights. International stock funds did better than U.S. domestic ones, both over the quarter and the 12 months during March. The comparisons were a gain of 0.8% for international stock funds over the quarter versus a 1.2% loss for domestic funds and a 26% gain for international funds over 12 months versus a 16.8% rise for domestic funds. Over 5 years, however, domestic stock funds beat international funds with an annualized return of 8% versus 6.1% for international funds. Latin America stock funds were standout with an average return of 12.2% over 3 months, 49.5% over 12 months, and 10.4% annualized over 5 years. Domestic bond funds beat domestic stock funds for the quarter. Through domestic taxable funds will lose 0.2% over 3 months, while municipal bonds funds were flat. Over 12 months, taxable bond funds gained 5.4%, while municipal bond funds, which is typically exempt from at least some income basis, returned 3.8% on average. Wow. Over 5 years, domestic taxable funds returned 22%. Municipal bond funds returned 0.9%. Both funds, in short, did a bit better than stock funds during the stock market. Ooh. During the stock market declined this year, but stocks beat bonds over longer periods, as they often do. Within the U.S., stock market energy funds benefited from soaring oil and natural gas prices, with an average gain of 34.5% for the quarter and 100. Ooh. Within the U.S. stock market, energy funds benefit from the soaring oil and natural gas prices, with an average gain of 34.5% for the quarter and of 44.6% over 12 months. Over 5 years, the annualized return was 23.3%. Precious metal funds, which included those investing in gold and silver, returned 7.3% for the quarter. But over 12 months, they gained 23.8%, and over 5 years, the annualized return was at 104%. Target date retirement funds generally had smaller losses for the quarter, but solid returns over longer periods. For example, the average 2030 fund, aimed at those who plan to retire in their year, declined a 0.85% for the quarter, but posted a gain of 12.8% during this time. Retirement income funds, which typically contain a high bond allocation and a modest exposure to stocks and are often used by retirees, lost 0.4% in the quarter, but gained 9.1% over 12 months and 3.6% over 5 years annualized. The takeaways. Holding low-cost index funds that merely track the market and staying with them for decades has been a successful strategy. I'm sticking with it, but it's not without its perils now. The war, the ongoing on-again, off-again tariffs, the Trump administration's disregard for traditions, and for many, their checks and balances in the United States government have changed the investing environment. Lighter regulation may help companies churn out profits and may also cause serious harms. Risks abound. There are dangers within the markets themselves. Artificial intelligence is a wild card. The technology has propelled market gains and led to the greatest stock market concentration in decades. As I've posted out, many market Many market bulls expect AI to lead to heightened productivity throughout the economy and to bigger profits for its leading practitioners. If this doesn't happen, however, it may be difficult to sustain current market valuations. Bullish strategists say that because earnings have increased while stock markets have not kept pace, the overall stock market and the high yielding tech stocks are more reasonably priced than they were 6 months ago. Can investors count on the U.S. stock market to value to outperform the others? I don't know. I've got no crystal ball. The enduring strength of the U.S. economy and markets is a marvel, but the shifts underway in the world worry me. So I'm hedging my bets as I have for some time. Stocks and bonds from throughout of the world in market allocations, along with ooh, safe stashes of cash, helps me sleep. Do what it takes to get you through the night. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A game plan to coach Peloton back to health. It is not what everyone would describe as a dream job, but when the chief executive role at Peloton opened up, Peter Stern jumped at the opportunity. He reached out to the headhunter for to pitch himself, and in early 2025, he became the company's third chief executive in 3 years. Peloton rode high during the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic, when gym goers were forced to work out at home. But in recent years, its subscriptions have stalled and sales have dropped. The fitness equipment brand's market value has cratered from a peak of nearly $50 billion 5 years ago to around $2 billion. A Peloton user before joining the company, Mr. Stern, 54, has worked in subscription businesses throughout his career, with stints at the Time Warner, Apple, and Ford Software and Services unit. This is actually my dream job, he said in an interview at the company's headquarters in Manhattan. It has been bumpy. It has been bumpy this year. Peloton laid off 11% of his workforce across departments, including engineering and content. In a recent earnings report, the company lowered its forecast for sales, spurring another big drop in its share price. Subscribers churn increased last quarter after the rise in prices, and last month, Peloton's chief financial officer left the company. Part of Mr. Stern's plan is to redefine what Peloton is known for. Last fall, the company announced artificial intelligence features that curate workouts for users and an upgrade lineup of stationary bikes, treadmills, and rowing machines. The company has also broadened beyond cardio and offers more classes on strength training and yoga, as those workouts have become more popular in recent years. It recently said it would make Peloton brand equipment for gyms. I didn't even think there can be any strategy for this business that makes sense, Mr. Stern said. If we look at the subscriber dynamics for the company, we're not that far off from where we were at the absolute peak of COVID, which is a remarkable thing because at that peak, no one could exercise anyway other than at home. It might feel like we've a little less present in people's minds because there are now alternatives. One way I like to look at it is, where were we before COVID in 2019? And where are we now? The number of subscribers has grown if you compare that period. There was a huge spike in 2021 and 2022, but most of those people are still with us, and lots of new people have discovered us in the meantime. That was an unrealistic valuation of the company at that time. I would argue that the valuation we have now is also unrealistic. We're seeing vastly improved trajectory on revenue. We are now constantly delivering profitability. We maintain incredibly high member satisfaction. All of those things mean we we are right where we should be, and the valuation will come. Hmm. I've only been here for a little over a year. So what I can say is that there was a period when the company really was growing so quickly where it was just focused on the home. In that period leading up the pandemic, that was the differentiator for a couple of years. After that, people had no choice. The optimal exercise regimen is not just cardio, it should also include strength. It's our responsibility to make sure that we can deliver that complete diet. In our last quarter, we had 2 million members doing strength workouts. Not only do a very large fraction of our members engage in strength training in, in addition to cardio, but those who do stay with us 40% longer. Hmm, I don't think we're overextending. We're highly capable of producing a wide range and highly diverse array of classes across all of the disciplines you can imagine. In the last year, Peloton produced give or take 10,000 classes. Many businesses use a net promoter score as a tool. Your recommenders minus your detractors. We are typically over 70. That is the furthest thing from a broken business. Turnarounds take time, right? Hmm. In 2023, this company shrank 23 to 24% on the top line. Fast forward a couple of years, it was minus 8% in 2025. We're starting to approach flat for the rest of this year. That's what a turnaround looks like. Earlier, I walked you through the history of our revenue declines. That's one reason the work that we've done this year has been focused on reinvestment in the areas that make us special. That's our products, our software, content from our human instructors, and our community. What we're forced on, what we're forced on now is trying to get an efficient as we can possibly be in the areas that don't differentiate us. There were hundreds of companies that were doing that. We just wanted to make sure that we were reserving our rights. We've requested it. When will we get it? We'll be happy. But to be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it would be a very large amount. We're fortunately financially healthy enough that we're not waiting on that check with bated breath. I was born in Brooklyn, but I mostly grew up in Connecticut. My dad was a paper salesman and my mom was a fitness instructor. She would work for an outline called Nancy Strong's Aerobic Slimnastics. It was very 80s. She started with 8 women in their leotards in a little basement and ultimately had to move it to a gymnasium because she had 100 women showing up. There was not the technology to do what we do at Peloton now, but I have no doubt that if she had the opportunity, she might have been the kind of person that could have scaled to the tens of thousands that would have in a class now. I would work with her to make her exercise plans, and I would In retrospect, it was mm, it was most likely I wouldn't work with her to make her exercise plans, and I would. In retrospect, it was likely a massive copyright violation. Make mixtapes for her classes on my boombox. Hmm. We sold Time Warner Cable to Charter Communications, now the largest cable company in the country. I had an opportunity to stay at Charter, and my wife said to me, "You spent the last 15 years taking care of our family and being a cable guy. Now is the chance to do what you love." I realized that I had been an Apple fanboy since I was 10 years old. I said, "I've always wanted to work for Apple." "I've always wanted to work for Apple," she said. "If that's what you want to do, let's do it." We picked up and moved to California. I have I could have stayed with with what was comfortable or started over again. I'm so glad I did. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Unveiling an architectural time capsule. Over the years, the historic Stockade District in Kingston, New York has survived occupation by British forces, near total destruction in the Revolutionary War, and ravaging waves of cholera and yellow fever. But by the 1960s, the largest threat to its survival was the suburban shopping mall. During the 1970s and 80s, more than 100 downtowns from Poughkeepsie to Mesa, Arizona, installed pedestrian plazas or sidewalk canopies in a scramble to compete with the rise of malls. Covered sidewalk structures were sometimes accompanied by a slip covering, metal panels holding fully intact masonry facades, windows, and all. In the mid 1970s, the Kingston Urban Renewal Agency adopted the trend, bolting a series of continuous sidewalk canopies onto the exteriors of 44 commercial buildings in its uptown business district. The concept was to unify the neighborhood into its own kind of mall, with a turn of the 19th century motif and a hedge against rainy days. Now, after 2 years of debate, litigation, and emotional outbursts from residents about whether this mid century fixture should stay or go, Kingston is hitting undo. Over the course of 2 weeks in February, construction crews carried out the $1.2 million job of tearing down the Pike Plan, as the canopy system is locally known. When they were done, gutters hung catawampas above pedestrians' heads. Fire escape ladders dangled 13 feet in the air, and a stripe of black waterproof roofing liner stretched across the fronts of buildings for 2 blocks. If you were to walk in uptown Kingston during the demolition, you would have thought that it was Dresden after World War II, said William Hurst, a lawyer who represents the real estate developer and Stockade District property owner Neil Bender of William Gottlieb Real Estate, one of the decision's most vocal opponents. And if you walk through it now, you will see that there is something very, very wrong with the way of the buildings look, because they're all adorned in construction tape. While the process has not been pretty, it has opened a mid-century architectural time capsule to the delight of many residents who are now discovering antique transom windows, hand-painted signage, and ornamental metal hidden for half a century. It's crazy. Half the stuff I've never really seen, said the Kingston native and barber Mike Conti, owner of Pugsley Barbershop on North Front Street, as he and a neighbor admire the Art Deco engravings on copper trim framing his storefront. "Yeah, the windows there," said Joe Concra, an artist and building owner pointing out the gap above the entryway, and you had an archway window too? Is that right? Mr. Conti said, shaking his head in disbelief. Perhaps. Their biggest surprise was the Luxor glass tiles with original designs by Frank Lloyd Wright. Wow! In 1897, the budding architect took a gig with Luxfer Prism Company and designed the patterns on his signature 4-inch pressed glass squares with prismatic ridges engineered to draw light indoors. They were all the rage until the arrival of electric lighting. Around the corner on Wall Street, Luxfer tiles were revealed on Mr. Congress Building too, installed alongside locally forged cast iron columns with lettering reading Rondout Iron Works. The disappearance of the Pike Plan takes some getting used to, especially for people who grew up with it. I was on the fence, said Dave Amato, a lifelong Kingston resident and the owner of the North Front Street restaurant Bricksman. Then he got his first unobstructed view of the architectural main of the original architecture. One building now features a 3-story black and silver London's varsity shop painted sign from the 1960s. I'm feeling very independent right now, said John Perry, a physical therapist who owns the building beside the London's mural. We're moving away from the three and becoming our own identities, and it's been a bit of a history lesson. To some, the original Pike Plan concept, conceived by a local watercolorist, John Pike, was a nostalgic, charming feature that set Kingston apart. In 2024, the state deemed the structure eligible to apply for a listing in the state and national historic preservation registers. Others only saw its pitfalls as it variously rotted, collapsed, trapped cigarette smoke, housed vermin, and obscured storefronts. By the early 2000s, many cities had scraped their pedestrian malls, often using grant funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. In 2010, after decades of deferred maintenance, building and business owners in Kingston petitioned to have the Pike Plan taken down. But the city doubled down, moving forward with a federally funded rebuild. Less than a decade later, the structure needed more serious repairs. Another restoration would have cost an estimated $10 million, according to Mayor Steve Noble. This winter's removal, including the demolition costs and $1.47 million in settlements to affected property owners, to tail around a quarter of that. But there is still a lot of work to be done. The settlements were an explanatory fig leaf that would not come close to covering the cost of the restoration and preservation work ahead. Mr. Bender's firm's properties have filed 7 lawsuits against the city over the Pike Plan, citing negligence and breach of contract, and sought intervention from a federal judge before the demolition. Every other Stockade District property owner has signed a settlement agreement, arguing to foot the bill for any further work. For Teresa Weidman, a sound healing practitioner and podcast host who owns one of the original London's buildings, the slipcover removal brought bad news. Parts of her facade are missing, as is the cornice that once embellished the roofline. Any update she makes will need to be approved by the Historic Preservation Commission, accurate to the period of 1930 to 1959, the years for which the Stockade District has a National Historical Register listing. But Miss Whiteman said the arrival of spring was helping people see new possibilities for the Stockade District. The canopy's removal was destabilizing for people, she said, especially in turbulent times. But now that people are walking around and the sun is shining on their face, I think we're realizing change is okay and can even bring something better, like light. The blessing and the curse is that now everyone inside your company becomes a coder. Michelle Catasta, the president and head of artificial intelligence at Replit, an AI coding startup. Post-pandemic, there has been just a surge in the demand for our premium products. Andrew Nosella, United Airlines Chief Commercial Officer, on travelers' appetite for the nicest seats on a plane. What we do know is that growth will be slower, even if the new piece is durable. Kristalina, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, on the global economic outlook. The app for every time, the New York Times. Listen, read, follow. Download the New York Times app here. Tech changed the world. So did the bubonic plague, the audacity. New series, April 12th at the AMC. Tech changed the world, the audacity. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, April 12th, 2026 issue of the New York Times Business section. We read from the New York Times Business section every Thursday at 11 a.m. Your reader has been Janice Marie Hunt. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock, it's episode number 6 of Twice by Mitch Albom. Stay with us for these readings and more.
afternoon. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind.